Hey listeners, welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast by Third Wave. Today I am speaking with Dr. Daniel Stickler, the co-founder and chief medical officer of Apeiron ZOH.
It just makes so much sense to look at things all together rather than trying to look at the human system from a reductionist model. And that's the whole reason I went into this, is because I realized that all this stuff we were doing in medicine was reductionistic and was not as effective as it could be. And it's not a system that we can change at this point. It's like we were talking before this, Buckminster Fuller, you've got to completely abandon the system and start over with something. And that's what we did.
Hey listeners, I'm so excited to have Dr. Daniel Stickler on the podcast today. I met Daniel a couple months ago as he interviewed me about microdosing for the Neurohacker Collective podcast. I had heard about Daniel's work from several friends and knew that he was an incredible human at the pioneering edge of longevity, psychedelics, and precision medicine. And so we wanted to bring him on the podcast today to talk about that overlap. I just wrapped up the conversation and it was even better than I expected. We talked about peptides. We talked about Nietzsche. We talked about what longevity means. We discussed stages of consciousness and how Daniel works with clients to help them stabilize at more transcendent states. We got deep into biomarkers. We talked about the pillars of longevity, reducing biological age. This really was one of those wide-ranging conversations. And what Daniel said at the end is, there's something to be said about being a deep generalist. And that was this type of conversation. Daniel knows medicine, precision medicine really well, but he also has knowledge and context around a broad array of topics. And we were able to bring in a lot of that context into today's conversation. Dr. Daniel Stickler is the co-founder and chief medical officer at Apeiron ZOH. He is the pioneer behind systems-based precision performance medicine, a new paradigm that redefines medicine from the old symptoms-based disease model to one of limitless peak performance and system science in all aspects of life. He is the clinical faculty age management medical group and American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. He is a medical director for the Neurohacker Collective and Qualia. He is on the scientific advisory board for True Diagnostics. He is a Google consultant for wearable technology, epigenetics, and AI in healthcare. And he is also a guest lecturer at Stanford University on epigenetics in clinical practice. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Daniel Stickler. Hey listeners, welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast. Today we have Dr. Dan Stickler, the co-founder of Apeiron ZOH and a pioneer at the intersection of longevity, complex systems, precision medicine, and our favorite topic, psychedelics. Dan, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
Pleasure to be here and excited to talk about these things.
So as I was doing a little bit of preliminary research on your background, on what brought you into this space, there was a phrase that stuck out that I think will provide an appropriate context for our conversation, because I think a lot of what you're doing is within this frame, within this paradigm. And that phrase is systems-based precision lifestyle medicine. I'd love just as we open up, if you could help our audience to understand what that means. What does it mean? What is precision lifestyle medicine? What does it mean for it to be systems-based? And why is it that you chose this path to pioneer?
It's a mouthful to say, and I will try to keep it concise. What it is the human system. If you looked at the human system, and you said, what kind of system is that? How do we define this system? Is it a simple system? No. Is it a complicated system? No, not really, because complicated systems don't adapt. They will stay consistent with what they do. Is it a complex system? Yes. And in fact, it's a complex adaptive system. And in order to truly assess a complex adaptive system and understand it, you have to use complexity thinking. And this is where I think a lot of medicine has just gone down a no-win road because they've looked at using complicated thinking to define it. And this is what I ran into as I went through medical school and then later as a general surgeon. I couldn't understand why certain aspects were overlooked. And, we had all these algorithms. Algorithms do not work on a complex adaptive system because it adapts, it changes with different things. And the other thing was I went into functional medicine because of that, but then I realized functional medicine was very similar too, because they're always looking for the root cause, and complex adaptive systems never have a root cause for an output. They're always a combination of all this different network of interrelated stuff. And, we focus on organ systems, like we focus on the liver, or we focus on the heart. And it's like, you've seen those complex systems maps where you have all these dots and all these lines interconnecting them everywhere. In complex systems thinking, you look at the relationship between everything. You don't look at the nodes themselves. And when we look at organ systems, we're looking at nodes. So it makes it very difficult to understand that a small perturbation in the node of the liver will have a profound effect at someplace else in the system. Just kind of like in physics, they talk about the butterfly effect. In quantum physics, they're talking about how the butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil and creates the tsunami in Europe. It just makes so much sense to look at things all together rather than trying to look at the human system from a reductionist model. And that's the whole reason I went into this, is because I realized that all this stuff we were doing in medicine was reductionistic and was not as effective as it could be. And it's not a system that we can change at this point. It's like we were talking before this, Buckminster Fuller, you've got to completely abandon the system and start over with something. And that's what we did.
A few words that I wrote down as you're talking about sort of the simple versus complicated into complex systems, the word anti-fragility, which a lot of our listeners have heard me talk about before, popularized by Taleb. This is central to navigating complex systems. Another one is iatrogenic, how our medical system tends to over prescribe or over,
cause harm.
indicate, and not allow the full system to be. And then another thing I underline, because I think it's relevant to this concept of precision medicine, is what you said around how algorithms don't work for a complex system. And I want to go a little bit deeper into that, because my understanding of precision medicine is that we're using blood panels, we're using the Aura ring, we're using other sort of metric-based systems to understand the individual as a whole. And then I don't want to say interventions necessarily, but the choices that we're making about how to approach that individual are potentially coming from, it's not an algorithm necessarily, but maybe your experience and intuition as a medical professional. So I'd love for you to just explore even that paradox of, I often hear about precision medicine talked in sort of conjunction with artificial intelligence. And there's a lot of promises that artificial intelligence is going to really make precision medicine more mainstream. And yet, when I think of artificial intelligence, I think of an algorithm. So could you just kind of like flesh that out in terms of the polarity and the tension between algorithms and precision medicine?
There's certain things you're going to run into that have algorithms that will work in the majority of systems, but they won't work in every system. And that's where this variability comes into, is you don't want to apply algorithms across the board and think of it as law. And that's a lot of what medicine has been doing. Now in computer sciences with the machine learning and everything, because they're able to take so many variables to look at, they're going to get more accurate with what they're kicking out, because they're looking at hundreds of variables where we may look at 3 or 4 because that's all our brains can really handle when we're looking at interactions and relationships in these systems. So I love machine learning and the algorithms. We're actually using machine learning in one of our companies to work with understanding these inputs and how they interrelate, see correlations between things. It's really an exciting world to be in right now.
So I'd love to hear a little bit more, just to further ground this conversation about the client work that you do, in terms of why are people coming to you? What are maybe some of the challenges that they're facing? What process are you bringing them through? And what are some of the modalities that you're utilizing during that process?
So we work mostly with healthy clients. They're coming to us because they know of their potential to be better than where they are, whether it means taking them from homeostasis to a more optimized state, or even taking them from an optimized state to an enhanced state. And the differentiation between those two, one is more optimized is through lifestyle and biologic processes, whereas enhanced is where we take medicine, technology, whatever it is, and we're able to actually get the human system to go to levels that it's not capable of on its own. And so that's kind of the enhanced state. But when we do this, what we do is we rely on data. And, complex systems, the more data you have, the more accurate you can get on things and understanding the relationships between them all. So, we get 124 blood markers. We do 600 polymorphisms in their genetics that we look at. We're looking at their additional laboratory values along with like epigenetics. So we're looking at methylation marks relating to biologic age. We have 5 different tests that we do for that. And we're also getting like their movement and flexibility. We're getting their body composition, their bone densities. We map their brains with a full clinical QEEG. We map their autonomic nervous system. So we hook them up to a machine, looks like a lie detector. They've got probes on their fingers, on their chest, on their belly, on their shoulders, and their nose. And we take them through 5 stressors, and we see what happens to all of these markers in their system under stress. And then we see when the stressor is removed, do they get back to baseline, or do they maintain an elevated state that is going to impair them because it'll climb throughout the day as they encounter stressors? But once we do that, then we gather all this data along with we sit down with them for about 3 hours. Psychologist also meets with them, dietitian. And then we all get into a room and we review them. So all of our docs, all of our clinical people we call it a whiteboard session. So the person who's got this patient will present them on the whiteboard for the next hour, all the data, what they think's going on. And then everybody gives their input, which is so valuable because, everybody has our biases. I have my biases when it comes to things, some that I don't even realize. And it's amazing how much you miss when you're going, oh, I think this is what's going on. And then somebody will say, well, did you consider this? And I'm like, yeah, that's a big deal. And so we're able to get multiple brains kind of communicating from all different backgrounds to kind of set up an assessment and plan for the clients. And then throughout the year, we monitor them with wearable technology like the Garmin watch or the Oura ring. And we collect all of their biometric data each month and sit down with them and go through it each month and see what's happening in their system that's creating anything that's becoming better or becoming worse.
I wrote down, it's almost like a 360 for well-being, right?
Yeah, we used to call it a 360 review. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, because that's a very leadership sort of executive term, of course. And I imagine a lot of the people you work with are executives or founders or folks.
Actually, mostly entrepreneurs that are founders and people who have exited and they're bored and
Yeah, they want to get, it's like the more granularity and even the polarity that you set up of the myopic, right? You have the 124 biomarkers, you have the 600 polymorphisms, you have, all these elements, and it's still within this whole complex system. So even though that one thing might be off, it doesn't necessarily mean that something is wrong or that is the main variable to point to, which is where having multiple brains and perspectives in the room is so valuable. In that way.
Two other things that I forgot to mention is we work with their breath structure and mechanics as well.
We measure nose breathing versus mouth breathing.
Well, in terms of that, plus is it in the chest? How much is in the chest? How much is in the belly? And what is their CO2 production? CO2 has become such an important factor, especially in stress and anxiety. And we're finding a lot of people just don't know how to breathe. And so we work with them on that. But the thing we've added most recently is we're working with developmental stages of consciousness. We use a test from Stages International that Terry O'Fallon has created, working with things like the Keegan model, the spiral dynamics, and Ken Wilber's model, to really have a developmental kind of chart of how people progress through the stages of consciousness. And it's really helpful to understand at what stage of consciousness people are, and in relating to them and what you are trying to get them to do and how you communicate. I mean, it's just amazing how much that's added to our success.
That's so fascinating. Have you found a relationship between physiological well-being and stages of consciousness?
We find a lot. So we do quality of life inventories on all of our clients, and we find that the people that are and it's not like a hierarchy, these developmental stages, but people that are at further developmental stages, they tend to have a much higher quality of life in general. We monitor that every year with our clients, and now we're going to start monitoring how their stages of consciousness development progress throughout the years too.
Wilber has that phrase. I was just teaching a lecture right before this for our training program for coaches: wake up, grow up, show up. Right?
Clean up, show up.
Clean up as well is in there. And this is where I think, and this is where I kind of want to welcome psychedelics into the conversation, because of course this is where psychedelics can have such a powerful impact, is on these stages of consciousness, because they often allow an awareness, an insight into these higher states of being, these integral, transcendent states of being. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the individual stabilizes at that level. So much of integration then is, how do we close the gap or the delta between where we actually are and that state of being that we experience on ayahuasca, on ketamine, on psilocybin, on whatever it is. I'd love for you just for a little bit of context for our listeners, what is your relationship with psychedelics, both personally and professionally? What role have they played for you, and what role do they play in your medicine practice?
And so my first foray into psychedelics was in 2012 in Peru, and we'd gone to Cusco, and we went after a day of prep. We went for a full day of ayahuasca in this little Amazon village, and after that, we did the 3-day hike of the Inca Trail, which was just a profound experience. And the ayahuasca was profound, life-changing. But I came back, talked about all this great stuff I experienced, got back into my routine, and lost most of it. So I experienced a state at that time. So I did not really integrate into a stage. And, I've done various psychedelics over the years. We do ketamine therapy in our clinic. We don't do a large volume of it. It's just mostly for our clients. But I've seen profound work being done there with that. I know I'm in a community where psychedelics they're extremely popular, and there's all wide ranges of how people use them, what they're getting out of them. And, in general, it's just pretty profound, the impact that it has on the person, but the person also really needs a good ego container to begin with. They don't have that ego container. I think Jung talked about this, where our early years are to develop the ego to the point where we can contain this next transcendent state. If we don't have a strong enough container, it'll shatter when we try to do this. And I've seen that happen with people. But yeah, if you've got that good base, it really can lead to profound changes for people, as you've seen, I'm sure.
And I'm glad you brought up even the concept of ego containment, because one substance that has become quite popular, especially in the last few years, has been bufo alvarius, 5-MeO-DMT, the toad. And what I hear time and time again, and I've noticed a pattern with this, is those who don't have that sort of well-established egoic structure from maybe early childhood, they go into 5-MeO, and it can sometimes send them sideways, where, for a month after, for 3 months after, for 6 months after, there are a lot of challenges. There may be psychosis. There may be other things that come up. And so and this sort of just speaks to like the importance then of who is the practitioner that you're working with, how are they onboarding you into this, what type of assessment, what type of questions are being asked, because although psychedelics are incredibly powerful and efficacious, catalytic, there are also certain risks and certain things to be aware of if stepping into that landscape, because there is a relationship between awesome and awful, heaven and hell, madness and these mystical experiences, and in some cases the line can be extremely thin. So
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. If a practitioner is not asking you whether you have a family history of psychosis or you've had any psychosis personally, they're taking a major risk, because that is something that we have seen quite a bit of people that they didn't have any problems, but they had a family history of schizophrenia or something. And sure enough, it will kick them into a really awful state. So a good practitioner will take an adequate history, physical exam. Like ibogaine, you never do ibogaine without getting an EKG first. That's
for sure.
Criteria. And people with high blood pressure, ketamine can raise the blood pressure 10, 12 points on average. So all of these things have significant impacts on the system that needs to be really mitigated against or watched for. We're actually at the Psychedelic Sciences Conference in Denver in June. We're going to be premiering our genetic panel for psychedelic response. We're going to include MDMA, ketamine, psilocybin, DMT, cannabis, and its genetic predispositions to people with low metabolism, you can tell, or they're high metabolism for a certain drug. There's ones that will predict more risk of psychosis with certain drugs. How impactful they'll be, like MDMA. Some people just don't get much of a response from MDMA, and we found some genetic variants that the research correlates with that. And it's nice to have that as a practitioner, to look at somebody's propensities and know, this person is a very slow metabolizer of ketamine. So if you're giving them ketamine, you might want to do a much lower dose than what you're going to do, because it's going to really be persistent and higher levels in that person. So yes, I agree with you completely. That assessment is an absolute necessity.
I love that. This genetic panel for psychedelic responses. There have been a couple early tests for that, but none of them, I think, have proven to be all that useful or consistent, reliable. And considering your background and what you've done, I personally, as soon as that's comes out, please let us know, because we'd love to amplify it to all of the folks who are coaches and practitioners in our community who are interested in this. Because I'll backtrack a little bit. For this genetic panel, is this for medical doctors only in terms of working with clients? Is this something that will be more?
We're not a direct to consumer. We're business to business on genetics. So we have coaches that we've trained that use our genetics, and we're just going to be making that available for them. We also create a lot of genetic panels for physicians and hospitals. So, we've got the background, but one of the things that makes us different is we didn't develop the genetic company as a business. The genetic company was designed to just support our coaches so that we had something that we could be consistent with. And it suddenly became a business of its own because we were clinically vetting all of the panels. So we have like lifestyle panels. We already have a cannabis and neurotransmitter panels. We have an Ayurvedic Prakriti panel so people can find out genetically what their propensity for doshas are.
That's cool.
But we've used all the clinical data to develop them, and then we would test them in clients and see how well they correlated, and we would fine tune them based on clinical experience.
Wow. That's incredible. Okay. Final question I'm going to come back to the psychedelic stuff. But earlier on in the conversation, you mentioned optimization versus enhanced state. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to hear some of your reflections on when working within a psychedelic experience, would you consider that to be more of the optimization, or would you consider that to be more of the enhancement?
That's kind of a whole different category, I think. It's funny. I was having a conversation with my Ne Lama. I'm going through Vajrayana Buddhism training right now. And I was talking to him about a psychedelic experience and what I had gained from it. And he's one that has taken vows to not do any mind-altering stuff. He took it 30 years ago. And he was explaining it like, from a karmic perspective, we have these seeds within us, and these seeds will grow or not grow. And he was like, it's not the psychedelic that gives you what you're getting. He said the psychedelic is like watering the seed a little bit. You could have maybe gotten it from mantra or trance or meditation, or psychedelic that was the little piece that did that. So, it's psychedelics and consciousness. They're kind of in that category off on their own, I think.
It's almost like the mystical, the non-dual, the transcendent, right? Yes. When we think of optimization and enhancement, it very much feels like terminology of a dualistic worldview. And we step into the psychedelic space, there's sort of it just breaks that in a way.
Yeah. So your mind body when we're talking optimization and enhancement, and then we're into spirit when we're talking that consciousness piece.
Which I think is a great transition for the next question that we briefly touched on before pressing record, which is Nietzsche. And you studied Nietzsche in college, you minored in philosophy, and you made a comment before we went live that you kind of but just put a lot of the philosophy aside until the last 5 years. And I'd love just to hear your reflections on what learnings were facilitated by studying Nietzsche that have been influential in terms of the metaphysical perspective that you're bringing to medicine.
Yeah, it's it's amazing how it all kind of plays together in life. I discovered existential philosophy, taking it as an elective, and just it resonated with me. I was like, wow, this is perfect. And the University of Pittsburgh, where I was at the time, they were one of the top philosophy programs in the country. And so I dove all in, and I was an atheist at the time. And it just really made sense to me. And, some people saw Nietzsche as very nihilistic, even Buddhism. I mean, you can look at Buddhism and you can say it appears nihilistic, but he wasn't. In fact, the Buddhism and Nietzsche were both very much the middle way. Nietzsche talked about, being the Dionysian and the Stoic at the same time. You have that middle way that you can travel. And yeah, I mean, it just made so much sense. But then, I got into medical school, and the hours of commitment to that, and then being in general surgery residency, and then being one of the busiest general surgeons in my town after I got out, I didn't have time for any of that. Everything was just about work and learning about new techniques and all of that. And then I just walked out of surgery one day after 10 years and just said, I'm done. I'm not going to do surgery anymore. And I started focusing on this optimization and really working with people who were fairly healthy to achieve better states. And it felt really good. And over time, we started adding like the brain piece, the nervous system piece, and then all of a sudden consciousness started coming on board for us. And I'm like, okay, this reminds me a lot about the stuff I was learning in existentialism. And so I started diving back into that, started studying the Buddhism again. And it all just came together. I mean, it was like that seed was finally watered in me. It sprouted, but it never really took off, and it just took off.
The word of the company that you've co-founded, Apeiron ZOH, Apeiron means that which is unlimited, boundless, infinite. And of course, what was central to Nietzsche's philosophy is this concept that we are as gods.
Yes.
And the capacity to step into that is so critical. And the reason I bring this up in this conversation is because sometimes when we get into, optimization and blood panels and biomarkers, our perspective can get a little myopic. Yeah. And zooming out about, well, what is the larger sort of metaphysical lens here? Why are we doing what it is that we're doing? And what are you facilitating essentially as a medical doctor, as a facilitator, as someone who is pioneering the space? And this capacity, I think what psychedelics open up, what these higher states of consciousness open up, what modern technology has made more and more available, is that for the first time in history, there's a capacity for not just one lotus flower to bloom here and there, Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, but for potentially hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of lotus flowers to bloom. And I think when we're talking about those states of consciousness, right, those stages of transcendent being, this larger metaphysic that I feel is very relevant here is how are we supporting, or how are you supporting clients and the people that you're working in to step into that sense of godhood and what that might entail?
Yeah, it reminds me of Nietzsche's Thus Spake Zarathustra, and he talked about the Übermensch, which is the overman, and the last man. And the last man, so people were given a choice. They could be this Übermensch or the last man, and the god thought everybody would choose to be the Übermensch, to really take the risks for the greatest rewards, but have the risks of the greatest depths of failure and sadness and pain, but also you get to experience both. And he was shocked that everybody chose the last man, which was the person who chose the path of least pain and greatest comfort. And there was no real dynamic of their life. It was very flat. And we see that today. I mean, we see people going through life and, that's their choice. I mean, in Buddhism, the goal of the bodhisattva is to bring everybody up before we can get to that point of enlightenment. We found over the last 20 years, we looked at, we typically work with pretty high performers, but we work with people from stay-at-home spouses to military veterans to billionaires. And, there was 5 common things that we found. Like if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of, and his later stuff as well, the guy who doesn't have food to feed his family, his whole goal with every day is to find food, and his mind is occupied with nothing but that. And so he doesn't have the opportunity to learn an instrument, to dance, to sing, and do all of these things that can, advance the human state. He just wants food. But in the higher needs, we see this too, where people have deficiency mindsets. They may have $500,000 in the bank, and they still see that they don't have enough money. They will have this need for respect in the community that they don't have, even though they're wealthy, they're successful, or whatever it is. They still have this deficiency mindset of I'm not enough. We have people that don't feel love. They're always questioning love. Even when they're married, they'll be like, I just don't know if she loves me or something. So those deficiency states, while we don't think about it, those occupy our minds too, so that we can't advance to that transcendence that is available. And one of the things we work with is helping people to resolve those deficiency mindsets that they come in with. And purpose, love, community. I mean, those are all huge pieces that we work with them on to help them get through that. I mean, you don't find that in a typical medical evaluation, and that's such an important piece. I mean, our biggest metric of success every year is what's their quality of life score? Is their quality of life score improving? Because it doesn't matter if you get all their blood work into an optimal range and you get their body composition perfect. If their quality of life doesn't improve, you haven't done your job. They're coming to you to have a better quality of life.
And so much of that is relational. So much of that is about community. It's why even, the probably more mainstream conversation around this is like the blue zones in Costa Rica and Greece and these other spots. What they find time and time again is what is central to longevity is the relationships that we cultivate, because that is often what makes life worth living.
Yes.
Speaking of longevity, there is sort of a common thread that is coming up more and more, which perceives aging as a disease. And I'd love to hear your sort of thoughts on, because a key thing that you're focused on is longevity, what longevity entails. Do you believe that aging itself is a disease? Do you think it's something that can be sort of solved, if you will? I'm just curious to hear we talked a little bit about this before we went live, right? We want to be vital. We want to live to our fullest. And yet we also accept that death is inevitable.
And we want to die well,
And you want to die well. Yeah.
That's not an easy question to answer, because even in the longevity world, in the researchers and clinicians, there is a major lack of agreement on any of this. You have a group that believes that it's just the accumulation of damage over time, just like, a car that just gradually breaks down from wear and tear. You have another solid group that looks at it as our DNA is programmed to age. And the purpose of that is by turning over our DNA with each generation, we get adaptations to a changing environment. It's just like, if you dropped one of us back 12,000 years ago, we wouldn't survive, not because we lacked skills, but because the environment is so different that our genes aren't adapted to that environment. So you've got to have that transition of the epigenetic marks on top of genetic drift. So the consensus is all over the place, and it gets even worse when we talk about, will we ever cure aging? I mean, I don't see it as a disease. Disease implies, something that's external that's causing this in a sense. And, aging is just a natural process that we go through. Can we reverse it? Well, right now, there are aspects that we can reverse. I mean, we reverse biologic age quite a bit. When we look at methylation marks of the Horvath clock and the Dunedin pace of aging, glycan age, all of these things, we can actually reverse somebody from being 2 years older than their chronologic age to being 5 years younger in a matter of 6 months to a year. And we can keep it moving in some cases. What does that translate to in longevity and health? We're not sure, but it appears that the people who do that are physically healthier, mentally healthier. So I suspect that it's actually working in that regard. There is, there's a lot of new research right now. I mean, you want to talk about some research, the small molecule work that's being done to get hair cells to regrow in people that have deafness from aging. I mean, that's in human trials right now. Another company, Turn Bio, they just did a major webinar on it's called ERA, epigenetic reprogramming of aging. And they have this technique where they can take these messenger RNAs and microneedle them into the skin. And not only functionally, but also structurally, the skin reverse ages. I mean, in some cases, the equivalent of 30 years in changes in the skin. I mean, you talk about a unicorn company. I mean, I would invest in them if I had the money to do it, but I don't right now. But they're going to be, they're doing it the right way. They're going for something that's very obvious. The skin changes will be huge. And I think they're getting ready to start clinical trials in humans, which I will volunteer for if that happens. I tried to get into the hearing loss one, but I didn't have my hearing test from years ago that showed when I had normal hearing. But my right ear, I had a firecracker blow up when I was a kid, and now I have like maybe 10% hearing in my right ear. But I mean, this stuff is amazing. These gene editing. I mean, gene editing can be done in a garage laboratory, and they're already doing human testing with this using like FGF21. They're doing Clotho. All of these genes. I mean, Liz Parrish with I can't remember the name of her company, but she's already had it done to herself, and she's being monitored by Harvard, and they're watching these changes in her muscle mass and the age of her muscles and everything, and it's showing really good improvement. But being able to hit all of the systems simultaneously, I don't think we have anything that's going to do that. So it's going to be just a repair and recover over time with different organ systems. And, until we can, I mean, we're like in baby steps in this, but the potential is enormous. I mean, I think we're going to see pretty substantial, youthful, healthy longevity into the 150 and 200-year-olds within this next generation.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's the first kind of mic drop that I've had on the podcast in a very long time. I mean, in everything you just spoke about, I wrote down the epigenetic reprogram aging. It sounds like Botox on steroids in a way, right? Like,
yeah.
What would be the difference between that and something like Botox?
So as we age, we accumulate methylation marks on our DNA. And these methylation marks, typically what they do is they turn gene expression down or turn it off. And so as we age, we accumulate they're methyl groups that attach to molecules of DNA, and it decides whether it's going to be transcribed or not. And, the big thing was, when they hooked the young rats and the old rats circulation together back in the early 2000s at Stanford, and the old rats actually rejuvenated, I mean, truly physically rejuvenated. That started this process of, okay, what are these factors that are causing this? And so they initially isolated what they call the Yamanaka factors. And these were I think they've narrowed it down to OSKM right now, but they would inject these into old rats, and the old rats would just completely rejuvenate. I mean, it was like Benjamin Button type stuff, but they would die of tumors within, 2-3 weeks. And so they've been working on this since about 2010, trying to figure out how to make this work. But these small molecules, like the ones they're doing for the injections in the ear, they're portions of these OSKM Yamanaka factors, and they're highly successful with it. But what they're doing with the epigenetic reprogramming of aging is it's messenger RNA that gets into the skin and re-establishes the youthful profile of the methylation on the genes, so the genes can be expressing everything from a youthful standpoint rather than from an aged standpoint. And the messenger RNA degrades in like 48 hours, so it just goes in, does its job, and it's gone. So it's really an efficient process.
So just to put a cap on this for the listeners, I read about longevity here and there. I love doing podcasts like this with folks like you because there's a lot of rich, interesting information. Some of it flies over my head because there's sort of a more technical jargon to it. I'm tracking everything you're saying, but at the same time, I wouldn't necessarily be able to remember all of it. And I'd be curious if, for the listeners at home, many of them are interested in optimal well-being. Many of them are interested in longevity. What sort of like a few core things to pay attention to look out for, to start to integrate as part of longevity practice?
Well, at least 60 to 70% of aging is related to lifestyle.
Yeah.
Only 10% is related to your genetic predisposition. So
Gotcha.
People who say, oh, my grandfather lived to this old, so I'm going to be okay. No, it's 10% of it. But lifestyle, good healthy eating, and a good healthy eating plan. Not necessarily. I mean, people are promoting vegetarian approach to diet, but we're omnivores, and it's not so much the vegetarian, but it's really like a low methionine type of protein diet. So what we focus on in our clients is we check their genetics to see what their genetic predispositions are, but we modify everything around what we would say is a low grain Mediterranean style diet. A lot of fish, a lot of vegetables, very little red meat, and that seems to be, from the research, something that's really positive. Keeping stress under control, and I'm not saying avoid stress, but I'm saying learn to not let stress affect the body. And that's a lot of what we do with that neurofeedback and neurostimulation that we do in the office. And sleep. I mean, sleep is a huge one. And I'm not going to tell everybody to get 8 hours of sleep. I mean, you look at the data, and 7 hours seems to be the optimal sleep time. I know I'm going to get some grief from all the sleep doctors out there, but you look at all the Fitbit data for a billion nights of sleep, and they look at resting heart rate compared to how long you sleep. It's a U-shaped curve that peaks out at 7 hours. They also found that people perform better cognitively with 7 hours versus 7.5 versus 6.5. So getting that good quality sleep and making sure you're monitoring your structure of sleep. So the deep sleep, how much deep sleep are you getting? How much REM sleep are you getting? How much restful sleep are you getting? What's your readiness score? What are your stress scores? Which is something we monitor in all of our patients. I mean, I've worn a Garmin watch all but maybe a dozen days in the last 6 years.
Oh, wow.
It's always on my wrist. I have all the data. I can see what everything impacts on my system, whether it be a food or an exercise, or even people. You can see how your stress changes when you're with certain people versus other people, which is really kind of Orwellian, but it's there.
And what, for you personally, right, having tracked all of this data over the last 6 years, what is optimal for you, for where you're at, for, your stage in life, your profession? Like, what have you just found works really well for you when it comes to sleep, when it comes to exercise, when it comes to food, when it comes to longevity in general?
One of the things is not eating a lot. I eat 2 meals a day, and it's usually small meals. I'll occasionally supplement with protein drinks, but I mean, that's key. I also have a strict routine of going to bed at 9 o'clock. So I'm in bed usually 8:30 or 9 every night. My wife and I are both very fixed. I mean, if people ask us to go out to dinner here in Austin, we'll be like, okay, we have to eat at 6 though, because we have to be home in bed at 9. And they know that. So they accommodate us with it. But we get up at either 4 o'clock or 4:30 in the morning. That's our natural wake up time. And we spend 4 hours in the morning. We do meditation, and then we just lay in bed together. We'll talk, we'll do massage, we'll make love. But every morning for 4 hours, that's been our routine for the last 4 years now. Even when we're on trips or on vacation, we do the same thing. And the body loves that routine of knowing when it's going to bed, because it will actually start to turn everything down when you're in a fixed routine. And we don't eat generally past 6 o'clock. I mean, if we go out to eat, we do, but usually we're eating our last meal before 6 o'clock. And we don't watch any TV. So that
no screens,
too.
right before bed, minimizing blue light, all the sort of standard things. So from what I understand, so you go to bed at 9, you get up 4 to 4:30, but then you're in bed for maybe another 4 hours, so maybe till 7:30, 8:30. So although you're sleeping, let's say 7.5 hours, you're relaxing for about half the day,
right,
in total. And I think that sense of relaxation is just so not part of the way that we live today. We're always on, we're always stimulated, we're always going, we're always active. And what I've found to be true, and what the research also reflects, is that stress, that constantly being in a sympathetic state, cortisol levels high, that is sort of like a core central factor for a lot of other lifestyle, aging, disease.
Well, and I think the relationship too, just the talking that we do in the mornings. I mean, we talk about really cool things. When we talk about consciousness, we'll read to each other. So we'll find a really cool article that one of us will read to the other one. We'll be reading different books on generally the same subject, and we'll be pausing and saying, hey, listen to this. But that connection that we have, I mean, I had a client just this past week, and I was like, how much time do you spend, you and your wife together? And he goes, well, we plan 2 to 3 hours at least twice a month. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay. That's not much time.
Right. Not much time at all for an intimate partner. And like, I would even speak for myself. Sometimes that deepening of vulnerability, that rawness, that deep intimacy and familiarity can feel boring. Right. And so what I'm even hearing in how you're describing this is there's rituals, there's routines, there's still a sense of novelty, even within the sort of spending a lot of time and a lot of connected sort of energy with each other.
Yeah. And I mean, we call it, we make love for 4 hours every morning. And somebody said, man, that would exhaust me. I'm like, no, it's not like penetration love for 4 hours. I mean, that's part of it, but we're massaging each other. We're doing this, and it's every morning we do that. Wow. We're reading to each other, and that's our love making.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that on the podcast. I think that will be surprising to many, and also inspiring as something to explore and deepen with a partner and a spouse. Okay, so we're into the final 10 minutes. There's a couple other things that I want to touch on. One of which we have not touched on yet is Neurohacker Collective. So the way that we were able to connect and meet was a couple months ago. The microphone was turned around, and you were interviewing me about microdosing, which was a phenomenal conversation for anyone who's listening to this. Go check it out. I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on Qualia. I believe they're going through a rebrand now, but generally Neurohacker Collective. Why is it that you got involved with Neurohacker, and what is it that you love about Qualia, their sort of flagship supplement line, nootropic?
So I think it was 2016, fall of 2016, and I had clients that were coming in, and I was big into nootropics at the time. So we were trying all these different nootropics, and they were hit and miss. 50% of people would have a really good response. 50% of people were like, it didn't do anything for me. And suddenly I had like 5 or 6 people in a row come in and tell me about this Qualia nootropic they started taking, and they were all raving about the effect of it. So I got some of it and tried it, and I was like, wow, this stuff really works. And so I said, I reached out to them and I said, I'd love to talk to the formulator. And they got back to me, and I had a podcast at the time. So I interviewed Daniel Schmachtenberger, who is probably one of the greatest thinkers of our time. And Daniel and we did an interview, and we started talking about complex systems. And so we spent 5 minutes on the product, and then the rest of the time talking complex systems. And then even after the recording, we stayed on the phone for an hour and a half chatting. And a couple months later, he reaches out to me and he said, we're looking for a medical director, and I'd love to have you in that role. And even though I was busy and didn't have the time for it, I couldn't pass up an opportunity like that. And so Daniel and I became very close friends, and as well as his brother James, who's the CEO. And they are one of the few supplement companies that I looked at, and I actually modeled my supplement company thinking after that, because I was just amazed at the way the formulations were done. I mean, it truly is a complex systems process. They look at, okay, well, this is going to affect this system, and this one will affect this one, but this one may interfere down here if it does this. So how can we? I was just like, okay, this is the way things should be done, and that's the story. But they've continued to do that with their products. They put out just some of the best quality products on the market, and I am honored to be involved with them.
Yeah, I first heard about Qualia. It was probably 2017. I think this was back when it was like 10 different pills that you had to take, and they all had like a different size and
step 1 and step 2.
Yeah.
But let me tell you, that was the one. That one is still my favorite. I have cases because they quit selling it, and they gave me the cases of it. So I still take it. Yeah.
Really?
It is an amazing product.
What do you notice or what is the difference then between what they have now and what they had before, and subjectively kind of what is the difference in the felt experience? Is it just more clarity, more sharpness, more focus?
Well, again, it varies by the person. I mean, everything is bespoke for people in health. I have people that rave about the Mind product, and I get a good result from the Mind product. And if I didn't have something else, that's the one I would take. But the 2-step formula, I mean, there's nothing that compares for me as far as the impact it has. It had a couple things in there that they couldn't sell because they were taken off the allowed supplementation, like Noopept. Noopept is in the 2-step formula, and I love Noopept, and it works so well in synergy with the other pieces that are in there.
What is Noopept?
Noopept is a peptide that can be taken orally, and it just really turns the brain on. It's a very small peptide. I think it's 2 amino acids, and so it doesn't get broken down very much in the stomach and intestine, and we absorb it as is. But I know a lot of people. I mean, you can buy Noopept from research chemical companies and capsules and everything. I know a lot of people that take it and just rave about it, and it's one of my favorite.
Let's open that up a little bit more. We still have a little bit of time. Peptides in general. Peptides are something that you specialize in. If you had to just give sort of like a 3 to 4 minute overview to our audience about what are peptides, why are they useful, and why are they becoming more and more talked about and in vogue in sort of the health and well-being community?
So let's start off with this. I mean, you look at medicines and you look at supplements. They all have a target effect that you're trying to achieve, but every one of them also has an off-target effect. So even though you're getting positive results in this one area, you're going to get a negative impact in another area. So what you look at with them is, does the net result in something I'm trying to achieve? And, that's how we go through medications and supplements with our clients. Peptides are different because they're modeled after proteins and peptides, amino acids that our body already makes. So the body's actually familiar with these structures. And so they have binding sites that are highly specific for these little molecules, that these proteins that go in there, and they just attach to a receptor and cause an event to happen. In larger proteins, and there's peptides, polypeptides. So it depends. It's just a nomenclature based on the number. But something like growth hormone. Growth hormone is essentially a protein, but it's like this big ball of protein, and it's got like 20 different keys on the surface of it. And these keys are specific for receptors in different areas. And so if you give growth hormone, it's going to go around the body and it will find all 20 of these places to attach. So it will affect multiple systems. What they've done with peptides is they've taken pieces, they've just pulled individual keys off of these proteins. And they say, okay, we want the effect of growth hormone specifically on fat cells to get them to mobilize fat. And so they sequence that one little segment. It's folded the same way the protein's folded, so it's an exact copy of the key. And then they just send it into the system with an injection in most cases. And it goes and it does its job. It's very laser focused on target effect with very little, if any, off target effects, which is what has just, I've fallen in love with the peptides. I started using them back in 2017. I actually created one of the first courses on peptides for clinicians back in 2019. And they're just the darlings of the industry for me. And if they're not part of the tool belt of a clinician, they're missing something. Right now, the big thing is this Ozempic and Mounjaro, which are both peptides. Ozempic is GLP-1, so it goes and it activates GLP-1 receptors in the body and causes massive weight loss effect, insulin sensitivity. It's just wonderful. And then Mounjaro is tirzepatide, which is a combination of GLP-1 and GIP, which are two different ones. And that combination effect, I have never seen a paradigm change in weight loss like I've seen with these. And we started using semaglutide, which is Ozempic. We started using it back 3 years ago, I think. And we knew that this was going to be huge.
I only first heard about peptides. I went to this Runga event in May of last year that's hosted by Joseph Anu, who's now actually part of the team at Third Wave. And there was just like an injection station where you could go get some peptides, and I tried them out, and and they were great. And then I think I heard in the news, I think Kim Kardashian or something has been talking about peptides, or there's been some celebrities who have recently been talking about it. So it seems to be more and more in the zeitgeist, if you will, of health and well-being. And yet, if I were to go, ask my parents in Michigan if they utilize peptides, they'd have no idea what I'm talking about. So it feels like it's still in that pioneering stage in a way.
There's ones that accelerate healing. There's ones that enhance cognitive function. The one that all the celebrities are talking about is the Ozempic, the weight loss one. That's what's got it becoming so viral that there's a worldwide supply chain issue.
Oh, really? Why is that? Is it because it's coming from China, or?
I don't know. I think most of it's being produced by the pharmaceutical companies, but, compounding pharmacies have been able to produce generic versions of it because of this deficiency in the supply chain. But semaglutide, which is Ozempic, from compounding pharmacies, you can get it for, $200 for 12 weeks of it. And it's like $1,000 a month for the brand name stuff, but it's about to be removed from compounding pharmacies because the supply chain is catching up. But now we've got tirzepatide, which is the Mounjaro, which is in deficiency, and it's going to be in deficiency for a little while. So we're going to be able to use that one for a while too.
Wow. Well, this has been my favorite podcast conversations are the ones that come from the widest landscape possible. And so just the fact that we were able to talk about Nietzsche, ayahuasca, longevity, peptides, blue zones, you name it. We really covered the gamut today. This is, I think, really one of, if not the only podcast that we've had on this overlap of precision medicine, longevity, psychedelics. I think in a round 2, I would go a little bit deeper into kind of your understanding of psychedelics and physiology and inflammation and all these other things. But for now,
I'd be glad to come back. So
and
I've enjoyed this.
Welcome to come back. This I think is a good taste of the brilliance that you bring to the table. So I just want to thank you, Dan, for the pioneering work you've done in this. It is the future of medicine. It is a totally new paradigm that you're helping to pioneer. And I'm just so appreciative that you took the time today to be with us and share your wisdom, knowledge, and your heart. It really meant a lot to be here with you and to hear you just riff and share on all of these wonderful, brilliant things.
Thank you. Much gratitude for that.
Yeah. And I will see you in Denver. Yes. At Psychedelic Science. And this is just an invitation to all listeners as well. We will be at the MAPS conference. Dan, you said you'll have a table there for is that for the genetic testing?
We'll have one for our genetic testing and then one for our nonprofit that works with veterans and PTSD.
What's the name of the nonprofit?
The Apeiron ZOH Foundation.
Oh, it is. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, not complicated.
Okay. And is that, just quick, can you, before we end today, what is the mission of that nonprofit?
Yeah, my wife spent 30 years in the military. She retired as a colonel in the Air Force, and
wow.
She worked in human performance. So she worked with all of the special operators, a lot of the drone pilots and the skiffs and that, and she saw how impacted they were as far as their physiology and their mental health. And we started working with some veterans with some ketamine therapies and found some just amazing results with it. So we developed the nonprofit because most of them can't afford a lot of these more intensive programs. You can go to ketamine clinics and get your $500 sessions and do that, but we spend a lot more time with them. We do a lot of different modalities. So we work with optimizing their physiology as well as working with their mental states. So we developed that nonprofit to help support them.
And it's a phenomenal balance to the optimal performance, human well-being. I know a lot of entrepreneurs, founders, those who have become successful when they've had their lives transformed through psychedelics, they often then want to give back in that way and support. Yeah. The process of, people like specifically veterans or sexual assault survivors or folks like that so they can have a similar healing. Because I think, one thing that we all agree on is psychedelics are tremendously powerful and accessibility is key to ensuring that everyone can benefit from the potential that they hold.
For sure.
Absolutely. Any kind of like final things that you want to tell our audience in terms of your website, in terms of, things to check out, in terms of, places to point them to as a sort of final invitation?
I think just to leave you with a statement. Our mantra is live the life of excellence. And, what does that mean? It's not a matter of successes or wealth or anything like that, but fully experiencing life and all its emotions and all that it has to offer. And, just be that Ubermensch.
I love it. Daniel Stickler, Dr. Daniel Stickler, it's been an honor. Thank you so much for joining us on the Third Waves podcast.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date on the third wave of psychedelics, subscribe to this channel and visit thethirdwave.co, where you'll find plenty of free resources on intentional and responsible psychedelic use.